Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Miss Reddy.
You can call me Rishi. Do you pronounce your name Sarah or Sarah?
It's Sarah. Yeah.
It's Sarah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I think we can wait like a couple of minutes to wait for everyone to come in, but we can start in like 2 minutes if that works.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. How do you plan for, we didn't talk beforehand, so I'm just wondering, how did you plan for this to go a little bit?
I'll just like introduce the festival and I'll introduce you for a bit and then you can talk about your book if you'd like. And then I'll ask you a couple of questions about your book and then we'll have an audience Q&A.
Okay. And is it mostly over Passage West or is it Karma and Other Stories?
It's mostly about Passage West.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think we can just get started right now to just get into it.
I don't have like anything prepared
No,
before.
that's all right. It's
It's
all,
okay.
yeah, it's just questions I'll be asking you about like
Okay.
themes in your
Okay.
book. Yeah.
Okay, good. That sounds
Yeah.
great.
Okay, so I'll introduce the festival right now. So the South Asian Literary Cultural Festival, which is organized by the Lexington High School Muslim Student Association, is a vibrant student-led celebration of South Asian voices in literature and storytelling. This multi-day festival highlights the richness and diversity of South Asian cultures through conversations with authors and discussions and overall community-centered events. This is rooted in the MSA's mission to just create inclusive spaces for dialogue and identity exploration. And it brings together students, families, and overall just the community to honor the narratives that shape and reflect the South Asian experience across borders and generations. The festival features both virtual events, which is one of which is right now, and it'll continue until early June. And then at the end, we'll have a culminating in-person gathering at our community center in late June. And through this hybrid format, we want to just engage a wide audience and just have the ability to connect a wide range of demographics. And so now, I'll introduce you, Rishi Reddy, for a bit. So Miss Rishi Reddi is a critically acclaimed author whose stories resonate with emotional truth, historical insight, and cultural depth. And she is best known for her ability to illuminate the lives of immigrants, particularly those of South Asian heritage which we can see in Passage West. And they all navigate the complex terrain of assimilation, injustice, and self-definition in America. Her debut book, Karma and Other Stories, was published to wide acclaim and was named a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. And the collection went on to receive the prestigious LL Winship / Penn New England Award. With her deep empathy, the stories in Karma explore the quiet, everyday dramas of Indian American families, capturing both their challenges and triumphs with great sensitivity. Passage West marks an ambitious and powerful turn into historical fiction. It's set in California's Imperial Valley during World War I and tells the story of Indian immigrant farmers and centers around Ram Singh, who confronts racial exclusion, harsh labor conditions, and the legal barriers of the earliest 20th century America. Would you like to add on to your book and introduce it?
No, I think you did a great job, Sarah. It's also a product of all of the legal things that were going on at the time. It's kind of like what's going on now. There's a lot of legal battles and challenges to the immigration system. So very similar in terms of the atmosphere, I think, of that time.
Mhm. Okay, now we'll just jump into the structured questions if you like.
Okay.
Okay. So the first question is, why did you choose to make your protagonist in Passage West a man instead of a woman? And do you feel as if these challenges men face as immigrants are vastly different than women?
I wanted to hew very close to the historical truth of that time. And the vast, vast majority of immigrants that were coming from South Asia at that time were men. There were a few women, and I have Harjot there, and I allude to other women who were in other parts of California. There were so few women that people knew where they lived. And there may have been some that snuck aboard ships who were dressed as men and, who remain mysteries to us to this day. But I wanted to stay very close to that truth that these were bachelor men or they had bachelor type lives. They were very lonely. They yearned for women of their culture. People have often said to me in this book, "Where are the women? We miss the women." And I think that is actually something that I did as a reflection of these men's experience too. Where are the women? They missed the women. And this is a very typical way of allowing immigrants into a country where the work of those men is thought to be exploited, but they don't want to allow the women in, because if the women are allowed in, then family groupings will form and people will stay. So one way in which to do this is to keep the women out through, soft means or hard means. So all of that I wanted to hew very close to the truth.
Do you think that the challenges men face as immigrants are vastly different than women? And if so, how do you think so?
Well, I think men's experiences and women's experiences, every gender's experience is very different than another. And so, of course, in the situation of immigration, that is true as well. And so, um, you know, there's a lot to contend with uh, in terms of demands of the gender that you're born into and societal expectations. And of course, for these men, they were and you see it today, many people who come over as single folks are expected to send money back to earn enough so that they can support both themselves in this country and what's happening at home. In those days, because of sort of women's cultural place in society, that wasn't as expected of them. So it was these men who had to come over and do that work. For a woman at these times, at the time of the novel, they would have to contend probably both with the isolation of being at home if they came over, as part of a family unit. If they didn't, or if they were expected, even as part of a family unit, to go out and work, they'd have to contend with the lower place of women in American society in those days as well. So it's a hard question to answer, Sarah. And it was something that, by looking at four men in particular and sort of Harjot out at the side in terms of, the four central characters, and then Harjot who was there as well, and her daughter, you know, I was trying to keep in mind sort of what was happening to all of them as a family, and to take apart, you know, a man who decided to marry and stay here, a man who decided that he really wanted to go back home, a woman who followed her husband here, and the girl who was growing up here as an American, really as an American. So I was trying to look at a universe of people in different immigration situations.
You mentioned that like men had the pressure to send money home. Do you think that was especially high in South Asian culture, or do you think this is a universal experience?
I think to some extent it is a universal experience, and I don't know other cultures as intimately as I know the South Asian culture, and I know how much, those folks, if they were in Punjab at that time, it had gone through a series of famines. It was in a pretty bad place economically. So the ability to send men off to the British Army to earn money and send it back home, or the ability to go to other parts of the world, earn money in different jobs and send it home, was really an important part um, of a family's economic budget, like how they were going to get by. But you hear the same thing now, don't you, about so many immigrants that are coming up from South America and Central America. They're sending money home. They're helping to keep people alive in their home countries and their hometowns. So I think it's a fairly common phenomenon in terms of the world labor force and the way that labor is exploited and the way that we move people around the globe so that certain projects can get built for certain populations that seem to be on the wealthier end of the scale, and the folks who are coming over to do that are more disenfranchised. What they get is that paycheck, if that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So your story Passage West was centered in California, but you've experienced living in the Northeast. So do you think that the challenges faced for immigrants in California differ from immigrants in the Northeast? And do you think that if there is not, is it because they're both in liberal areas, or do you think there's another reason for that?
Gosh, those are all really tough questions. So I actually lived all over the US too, and the first place that my family came to was to Los Angeles. So it was kind of fun for me to look back at those old days. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book is because my mother used to comment on how the Latino Spanish speakers in Southern California, like how people would mistake us for that community. So that's imprinted. That fact that we were confused for another set of immigrants is really imprinted on my mind as a young person. Like people didn't even know where I came from. So do I think that, it's a different immigration situation? I mean, that part of, first of all, the rural area of which I wrote was at that time and still is today very politically conservative, which is pretty typical of farming rural communities, not everywhere, not all the time, but it's a pretty typical scenario. So although other parts, more urban parts of California may have more liberal populations or local politics, that's not true of the rest of it. That's even true of Massachusetts, where the liberal political operatives sort of center on the urban areas, and the more you get out to the country or down to Plymouth County and the Cape, that tends to be a little more conservative. So I don't think we could actually, um, you know, categorize these two geographic areas too much in that way. I mean, do I think that immigration, the flavor of it is different in different areas? It is, because folks are attracted to different areas. So, for instance, California has always had a large population that has come from South and Central America and from China, in that part of Asia that borders the Pacific Ocean, always had that. That's not what we always had here in the Northeast. We had so many people come over from Europe. We had so many, you know, the Irish, when they came over, how they influenced our city and our state. It was a different flavor. And now, you know, one of the first climate migrations from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, they came to us, in Massachusetts and Boston. So the flavors are very different, but an experience of it is often, there's many similarities, even though the people may be coming from different areas.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Do you believe that the Indian experience differs by religion, such as when comparing Hindus as compared to Sikhs? Or do you believe a lack of information and cultural awareness blends the two religions into one and creates a monolithic experience for the two?
I think the way that um, mainstream Americans look at those religions that are embedded in India, Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, Jainism, more. Mainstream America does not recognize all the nuances of these major religions that are, the practitioners are different from each other in many ways. And um, they don't understand what happens internally within that community, like the divisions that we often have between us, which we shouldn't have. And, in India, you see it play itself out sometimes, the way that the different sects react to each other. So, and the violence that's engendered there. Um, and I don't think that the immigrant community here is seen by mainstream America as having those same differences. We tend to be lumped all together. One thing I wanted to use the book to show is the way that that the community survived was by, we had the Gurdwara, and it welcomed Muslim men, and it welcomed the Sikh families, and all of the folks that were able to go there and be one and realize that they had all these similarities that was embedded in their culture. They were coming from one space, and that space was being oppressed by the British, which was a further unifying factor. I really wanted to play that out in the book and was very conscious to show the full array of the religions that were present from South Asia in the United States at that time. And the truth of it is that the vast majority were Sikhs, and the next biggest population were Muslims, and the third were Hindus. They were the smallest. Um, but people just don't recognize all those nuances here all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. That is something we've all
All the time.
experienced.
Right.
Uh, um, do you feel as if the struggle to adjust to a new society leads to a greater hold on customs or an effort to break away and fully conform?
Yes, to both of those. Because I often find that the older generation is really holding on to the old customs because it's what they knew, and it is nostalgic and it's tied to their childhood and the country that they loved. It's very hard to let go. And that the home country that they remember, and this is across all, you asked that question before about comparing immigrant populations. I think not everybody, of course, there are people who just want to forget the past and move forward. But I think many, many Indians that I grew up with, in the generation above me, felt extremely nostalgic about India and held on to a country that now doesn't even exist anymore. It's moved on, but they have all these older values and traditions that are sometimes not even practiced in the country anymore. It's a space that's sort of like separated by time. It no longer, because the country's moved on, but the people haven't. And then there's a lot of folks, I think, you know, most particularly the younger generation wanting to move forward and embrace everything that seems to be American. Um, but you find some folks of the older generation who want to do that too, who want to forget. And, that's what's so, but the intensity of those longings in both ways is great. That's part of the immigrant experience, how intensely people feel like they love this new country, or how intensely people feel that they are nostalgic for the old, is something that's, unique to an immigrant experience and is the heart of the experience, I think.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think for the younger generations, the ability to just conform to society is more driven by a push of never really being a part of their home country truly, or is it more of just a sense of belonging?
Well, you're really betwixt and between, aren't you, when you're part of the generation that may have been born here or was born in the home country, the old country, and came at a young age. You're really growing up in a parallel way where you may have heard about the customs of the old country, but you're not enacting them. You're not growing up that way. But you know, in the same instance, you're also not really, you're here in this country, but you don't have all the contacts. You're not embedded into the community the way you might have been if you were third or fourth generation. And so you're sort of skimming along on the outside here as well. You're not quite belonging here. This was my experience, at least, Sarah. I mean, I know people, and I grew up all over the country, but I spent my high school years in Wichita, Kansas. So
Oh,
that was very much about being on the outside. I
yeah.
wasn't, and that was, and I was an only child. So there was that piece too. And my folks were really of the type that were extremely nostalgic about India. And we're always talking about, oh, maybe we should go back. That was always hovering in the air. Maybe we should go back. Um, and I didn't feel like I belonged there. So after I've I don't know, in the past several years, I have met many South Asian immigrants who had slightly different experiences because they were based in New York or Chicago or LA, where there was a much more vibrant South Asian community and there was a different place to belong to. Um, and that wasn't my experience. So.
Hmm. Yeah. What do you think like pushed your parents to stay?
It's such a good question. They first came for the adventure. They went to England first and they lived in three different
Oh,
towns in the
really?
United Kingdom. Yes, yeah. They lived in three different towns in the United Kingdom, short period, a year each or something like
Mhm.
that. And then we came to Los Angeles and then we moved, to Philadelphia, West Virginia, all, Louisiana, Shreveport, Louisiana, St. Louis, Wichita. So they had a sense of adventure. And then when I got to a certain age, they thought, we can't go back now. It's too hard on Rishi to go back now,
Oh.
because it would be really hard get to get sort of assimilated into the society there at a certain age too. They felt that would be hard. So who knows? Like, I don't know. Sometime you just get started on this ramp of life and you can't slow down. You're just
Yeah.
going the same. And I think they may have experienced some of that.
Do you think it would have been like too hard for you to go back, or do you think you could have handled it going back?
I moved to so many places in this country. I probably could have gone back. I would have had difficulty in those years dealing with how I think what was expected of me as a teenage girl. That would have been very hard.
Mhm.
It felt constrained here, but I don't know. I think it would have been, and at the same time, like I also realized that my cousins and all who were growing up there, they had a social life that I didn't have. They were actually going out and partying a lot and doing a lot of stuff that I would never have dared
Yeah.
to. So it was very interesting to go back and supposedly that community was more conservative, but actually they were not. They didn't have to conform as much the way that we had to here, where our parents were a little more traditional. And so we had to be, a little more conforming and good. So it was a pretty complicated thing. I mean, I think I could have done that. It would have been a life-defining decision for
Mhm.
me, I'm sure, if that's what my parents had decided to do. But, you know,
I don't
thought
think
that,
I could have gone back. My parents are
no,
son, and I personally don't think I'd be able to handle it. I think it's just my parents, we don't move a lot, and my mom used to move a lot as a kid, so she would probably be able to, but I don't think me personally. That takes a lot of courage, I
it
think.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, after I, started my adult life, I
Mhm.
found that because I moved so much, I just did not want to move. I wanted to make this home space, the home that was missed. My first book, Karma and Other Stories, it's a collection of 7 short stories that are all based in the Boston area, one of which is actually set in Lexington.
Oh, really?
And yes, and the Cary Library, is
Mhm.
forms a part of the book. But I realized what I was doing psychologically in writing it was to form that Indian American community that I wanted, that I didn't have when I was growing up. And I had settled in Boston by that time, and I just sort of made it up. I thought, I'm just going to make up the community. I realized it sort of later after I had started on the second and third stories they were interconnected characters. They all got to know each other. They formed this community. Some of them were really nice, some of them were not. So, yeah.
Mhm. No, yeah. Were you, like, inspired by authors like Jhumpa Lahiri? I know she's been, like, based in Boston for a bit. I don't think she lives here anymore, but
She
I know.
doesn't live here anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I know she a lot like, The Namesake was set around in Boston. Do you think, like, that was an influence on your life or no?
Really, Jumpa and I are about the same age and we went to the same program.
Mhm.
So, her first collection of stories, I think, came out in 99. And it was great, to have that sort of Bharati Mukherjee sort of preceded her, and in terms of and Chitra Divakaruni, who was in Houston. Um, these were all Amitav Ghosh. They were all writing maybe just a little bit before her, and so I I wouldn't say this generation of right. We're all of a generation in a way. But I did read Bharati Mukherjee when I was, a young, aspiring writer in my late teens. I did read Chitra Diva Karuni, and they were a little older, and they were more the folks that made me, and like Anita Desai, for sure, who was a generation older. Um, they were the folks who were really made me feel like, yeah, you could do this. You can be living in, the West and be writing about India, and you don't have to be an engineer or a doctor, and this is something you could do. So it was a little bit older generation that inspired me to that.
Hmm.
And so Jhumpa grew up in Providence, and she did set namesake here around here. And even the collection of short stories, Interpreter of Maladies, is set around here, I believe, as well. And but I think she lives in Rome now, or at least
Yeah,
part-time. Yeah.
that's what I've heard.
Yes.
Just speaking about your book, do you have like any passage that really like made you feel like this really encapsulated you as a person? And if so, like which book was it in, or like what did it sound like?
I think my most favorite part of Passage West, and maybe even of both books, I'm not sure, is the epilogue to Passage West, which is from the point, it's the only passage that's, written in the point of view of the wife that Ram, the protagonist, leaves behind. And so the whole book is about the adventure that Ram has
Yeah.
in the United States, and his wife is writing to him, telling him what has happened to her. But the only time the book goes into her point of view is that epilogue. And I feel like it was the reason that I wanted to write the book, because it encapsulates in 2.5, 3 pages her entire life without him and what that meant to her. Like these forgotten women who were left behind because the men had to go forth, earn this money, and they either wanted to do it or, they were forced into doing it. But regardless, their their wives' experience of life was the same, which is of being sort of left at home. And maybe they were part of a vibrant community there and it didn't matter. Um, but oftentimes these men had, they came here and many of them had second wives and second families because it was extremely lonely. And so, you know, they had you know, I, some people might consider it a depleted life, not being able to have the children that they might have had, or not being able to have, you know, um, the status that having your husband there would have afforded you. So I, I wanted to tell that from her point of view.
Hmm. So you mentioned that you've like lived in so many places. Do you think there's like this one specific place you've lived in that has really impacted your writing the most?
I think it has to be Cambridge, which is
Really?
where I'm right now. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I did want to write about Kansas because I had so much to say about my experience there. And I have one story that's set in Kansas in the collection of short stories. But in terms of being surrounded by a writing community, where people are constantly working at their art, whether it's music or writing or dance or, all of the things, like it's really, there's a focus on that in this part of Massachusetts. And it was really lovely for me to surround myself with a community of writers and to find that community, who are now my closest friends, so that we show each other our work, and, we complain about like what happened with that publisher, and, like, so there's, I would have to say the experience in Kansas, which made me feel like, wow, I have to write about this. And then being here really helped. I live on the street with two other published writers. I mean, that
Really?
doesn't, yeah, that doesn't happen, right? There's like 3 or 4 of us
Yeah,
that live on the street.
that's
That doesn't happen.
crazy.
Oh, I know, but it's pretty typical of, the neighborhood where I live. So,
Yeah.
I, yeah.
Do you guys like share your work or like whenever you're editing your work, do you ask them to like check it?
Uh, I've showed my work to one of them before, but I have a group of friends, who are sprinkled all over the city who I do that with. They're
Oh,
not
really?
necessarily the friends that I live closest to, but yeah,
That's
yeah.
Do you have like one specific community of South Asian writers and then a broader community, or is it just one broad community of writers?
I do. I try to follow South Asian writers and I try to support them as much as I can, whether that be by social media or perhaps, if one of them is launching a book, I might do the interview with them, in a bookstore. Um, I've blurbed, um, I've blurbed books for other South Asian writers more. I try to do book reviews. Like if there's a book that's coming out, I did a book review of Madhushree Ghosh's um,
Oh,
um, memoir about food, and what her parents taught, and especially her father taught her about food.
mhm,
Um, so I do that kind of thing. That's my larger community, but there's no, I don't have this intimate community of
mhm,
South Asian writers. But I do try to support them as much as possible. And I have been thinking about forming a community of South Asian artists and, having us meet, once every 6 months or something like that, just for fortitude sometimes,
yeah,
you know. I think so that's sort of in the works, Sarah. I have, my kids are old enough now where I feel like I can start to do this. I couldn't do it a few years
yeah.
ago. So
Do you have a favorite bookstore in like Boston or Cambridge that you like to go to?
I love Porter Square Books because it's right down the street from me and I know the owners and it's just fun to have a great store like that, just to walk there in 5 minutes.
Oh, really?
So yes, so I do love them. But I like to I do like to go to the smaller bookstores. They just feel a little more intimate and yeah, that's,
Yeah. Do you know
and
Brooklyn
there,
Booklet? Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
I do know Brooklyn Books. No, go ahead. Go ahead. What were you
Yeah.
gonna say?
I was like, I love that bookstore, and I
I
went
do
there,
too.
and it was filmed. It was like in do you know the movie American Fiction?
I do.
Yeah, it was in it, and I thought it was just so cool.
Where was it in it? What scene was it in there?
I think it was like when he was like, like his rival author that he doesn't like, he like checks out her book at the bookstore. I think,
Yes. Was that
yeah,
Brooklyn Books? I
I
did
think
not know that.
so. Yeah.
I did not know that. Brooklyn
Yeah.
Books was the place where I launched my first book. So
Oh, really?
yes, I did my debut
Cool.
launch there in the basement. Yeah. It was
That's really
really,
nice.
really very special memory. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so cool, actually. But yeah, I guess we can move into the Q&A as we're wrapping up. So, the first question is, how did your legal background influence the themes of justice and belonging in your work?
Well, in Passage West, it was inspired by what I learned in a constitutional law class when I was a student, which was about Bhagat Singh Thind, who was the first um, person to have, I should say that more accurately. Bhagat Singh Thind was one of the early people to have been granted American citizenship, but then he brought the Supreme Court case, which he eventually lost, and the citizenship was rescinded. And that little factoid where we were reading the case that rescinded his citizenship is what made me realize, like, oh my gosh, there were South Asians here back in the 1910s and 1920s, which I didn't know because, we came in the early 70s. We were of that arrogant generation who believed that we were the first ones here because there had been a break in the immigration stream from South Asia. And this whole book, Passage West, is about why there was a break, why there. So we never recognized all of these people who had come before. When I started doing the research, I thought, I want to write about that and how that could happen, like the way that people could be granted citizenship and then have it be taken away. And then that those Supreme Court cases, there was a string of them around the Japanese, around the British Indians, around Syrians, around Armenians and Italians, so on and so on, where each race was coming up. If you were not black and you were not white, that you had to show that you were white enough to become a citizen. And this very, as a lawyer, you can read those cases and feel like this is the most absurd way to interpret law ever and completely sort of, random. So it's infused that legal education viewpoint, the groping for justice is all infused in that in this book, in the Passage West book. In the first book, in Karma and Other Stories, I feel like it was more an affair of the heart. Like it was more about, it wasn't trying to make a political statement as much as this book was.
Hmm.
Passage West also came out in 2020, and it took me 13 years to write. But the last 3 years of it, but I submitted it to the publisher in 2019. The last 3 years of it was against the background of the Trump um, first administration, and that also completely influenced the way that it was written at the end.
Hmm. Do you think like with Trump coming back again, would you have changed parts of the books given his different protocols now, or do you think it would remain the same?
I think the points and the themes would remain the same.
Hmm.
I mean, again, I was trying to stay really close to what had happened. It was very important to me to depict history accurately, like fact by fact, and not take too much artistic license because I wanted people to know how it actually happened. So a lot of my research was really going into the newspaper accounts that happened at that time, going to a little library and a little museum that are right out there in the Imperial County and finding, first person accounts of what had happened, which then got covered up or got erased but it was really important to me to depict that. So although it was thematically and sort of the feeling behind my writing was influenced by what was happening in the first Trump administration, the facts are what they were then. Like I think every single incident in that book I read about somewhere in some first person account. And I may have changed it a little bit, but every major incident happened.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, were there any stories or historical figures that deeply affected you during your research for Passage West? I think you've mentioned the court case, but were there any others?
There was a woman who came over in it. This is just a glancing piece of the book. A woman who came over in the Koromagatu Maru
Um,
ship that landed up in Vancouver, and that she had that she was coming over at that time and then had been sent back. That was one piece that really affected me and was caught up in what had happened in
mhm.
Bengal after the ship was sent back. Um, but I don't know, I really got caught up in the research of all of these individual figures who were very compelling, and the lives that they read. And that's part of the reason why it took so long to write the book.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating, the research.
Do you think like maintaining historical accuracy like was one of the most important factors of your book? Or would you like to take creative liberties more?
In my next book, I would like to be freed of this. It felt a
Mhm.
little bit like I was in jail by the end because I was so committed to it.
Mhm.
But, the next novel, I think I would very much like to be, you know, purely a creative piece, um, and take a little more license. I was very committed to it, but now that it's finished, I feel like, I'd like to do something else. Something that,
Yeah.
maybe is set down the street in Cambridge or something.
Oh, really? That'd be really
I'm just
interesting.
saying, just so it would be super easy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think it wouldn't be, I don't know, for me, whenever I'm writing something, it's just so hard to like maintain the accuracy, like historical accuracy. So I totally get it.
Do you
Um,
write a lot of historical work as well?
yes, I think I do like reading and writing like fiction, like creative fiction, but I do like dabble, I would say. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the next question is, do you ever struggle with self-doubt or creative blocks? If so, how do you overcome them?
I do struggle with self-doubt like every day, all the time.
Mm,
Even when I'm right in the middle of the work, or like right now, it's been a really long time. It's been about a year. or so since I was involved in the creative work. And I've spent a lot of this year feeling like, why am I not going back to it? And sometimes it's just life circumstance. It takes a lot of, one part of your mind is always working on a creative project, even when you're living your life. That part of your subconscious, it's like spinning in there. It's solving problems. It's like thinking of plot. It's picking up pieces from your surroundings that you can plug into the book. So it's a very all-consuming, endeavor. Um, but I suffer from self-doubt. Like I think every artist does, every writer does. And if they tell you they don't, they're lying. Because it's just part of the process. It's just sort of second guess. And then there are moments where you'll see a flash of light and you feel like, yeah, I got that, you know, I got that right, or I just solved that. And ultimately the work of art is abandoned. You never feel like you're finished with it. So there's doubt about that too, about where
So you're never fully satisfied when you finish your piece?
I have always been like, I'll go back and I'll read something now. In either book, if I picked up either book right now and
Mhm.
I'm sure I'd read a paragraph and feel like, why did I use that word?
Really?
Or like, I wish I had structured that differently, without a doubt. I mean, there are some passages I'll read and I'll be like, wow, I didn't know I could write something like that. And then
Oh,
there are invariably other passages I will read and I'll be like, why did I use that? Why did I do that? That was so, like, didn't I read it? Didn't I proofread it enough? Or didn't I
yeah.
edit it? Didn't I read it aloud to hear the rhythm of the words enough? You know,
Mhm.
so.
No, yeah. I think, yeah, that must be universal, I think, with everyone.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay, so the last question actually, is what are some common misconceptions people have about South Asian literature?
That we're writing about mangoes and arranged marriages all the time. Like, aren't you sick of people always thinking that they're going to get a story about an arranged marriage or something?
Mhm,
Um, and I think e- especially when you're writing in mainstream America, the struggle to not just provide the mainstream what you think they want to hear from you is a struggle.
mhm,
And so to talk about the nuance behind something, to talk about topics that may not be about immigration, that may not be about arranged marriage, that may not be about um, the tension between religions or whatever, and something more about the fullness of life, like say you wanted to write about that. I always have a feeling of like, wow, well, people want to read this. Like ultimately, like there's only a few stories in the world. There's stories about parents and children. There's stories about lovers. There's stories about best friends, or the adventurer, the rite of passage. Um, but it's hard to battle some of the stereotypes and where your book this isn't so much now that we're online and things like that, but
yeah.
where you go into a bookstore to physically find your book. Where will it be classified? Like what genre? Will it be in
Mm,
literary fiction or is it going to be in this, I don't know, thing called immigrant fiction? Or I once saw my book in a catalog like that just said, I don't know what it said something like South Asian fiction. And I thought, oh my gosh, this was a political statement and you're going to put it in this, this is a political statement about America and you're going to put it in South Asian fiction. Like that impulse to classify, simplify, we have to push back on that. And it's
mhm.
very disheartening as a writer to see one being cataloged, stereotyped in that way.
Do you think, like, even if the stereotypes in your book are, like, sometimes true, would you rather not include them just to push back, or would you just include them for historical accuracy in those type of situations?
Um, do you mean that the stereotype being accurate, Sarah, or the
Mhm.
stereotype being okay?
Yeah.
I just find myself whenever I'm like writing about something that is either aligned with the stereotype or counter to the stereotype, I find that I do a lot of analysis about it. Like, how am I using this? Whereas, what's it going to mean? If a white character in, a white suburb in the United States is cutting open a mango on the kitchen island, what does that say about that character? It says something totally different than what we think about a South Asian character cutting open a mango. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Do
Yeah.
you see those two scenarios, like how differently, if as a writer, if you were trying to depict something?
Hmm.
So I would sit there if I was trying to say something with that for one of my characters and they happened to be South Asian, I'd be like, what am I doing with this?
Hmm.
Why am I choosing the mango? Are they really wealthy? They're at a kitchen island. Do they have the kind of kitchen where they have an island? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I would question all those things where I don't think if you are writing amongst this group of characters with these background themes, you would have to think as much about it.
Hmm. So do you think as a person of color it's harder to like write a story that is more true to your own like self and experience as compared to like say a white author?
I don't think it's harder at all. I think it's all around the perception.
Hmm.
I think so, as much, and especially when you're creating early drafts, I try to minimize any thought about perception, you know, and I think any writer who really takes that part of their work seriously would do the same. You want to push away the editor, you want to push away the audience, and just write for what you're trying to formulate and for yourself in a dialogue with your own mind and your subconscious. But what that means for an author of color who's writing for folks across, cross custom and culture, and it means something different. So
Hmm.
when we think of it, we think of it a little differently, I think.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
every author deals with that. At what time are they going to start thinking about the audience? Perhaps never. But, you know, we what that means for a writer of color, whether immigrant or not, is something different.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so now that we've finished all our questions, we will wrap it up about now. So I would just like to thank everyone for joining us today for the second event of the South Asian Literary Cultural Festival. And on behalf of the Lexington High School MSA, we're just so grateful for your time and your presence and just overall just being here and agreeing to be here in the first place. So thank you so much, Miss Rishi Reddy, for just sharing your stories and your honesty and depth. And it just really meant so much and brought this festival to light. And we hope to see everyone at our third event, which is next Friday, so June 6th at 7 p.m. It's also online. And we will also have our last event, which I mentioned previously, on June 20th at 3 p.m., I believe. So thank you everyone once again, and thank you so much, Miss Rishi Reddy.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was a pleasure to be here and insightful. Thank you both.
Thank you.